Hey, Skippy John Jones. It's time for Collection Connection, the game that's just an excuse to talk about records. Two records, specifically, that have a particular feature in common. The first record is the one shown by my brother, Plastic Eric, in his most recent video on his channel, The Plastic Soundwave Cult. It'll be a record from his collection, and I'm tasked with finding a title from my own collection that shares some facet or quirk with it. And that'll be the second record that I talk about. Our musical tastes have a lot of overlap, but also venture into more idiosyncratic areas, so I never know if he'll pick something that's brand new to my ears or a record with which I'm deeply familiar. Today, it comes from column B, as we have a pair of greatest hits albums from bands that helped define the sounds of the 1970s. Eric's pick was Queen's Greatest Hits from 1981, and I thought it would be interesting to compare and contrast it with another mega successful greatest hits comp, Gold, the 1992 best of from ABBA. But what connects them? That is the question. I got a bunch of caveats here, but if you think you can work out the connection between these two albums, put your guess in the comments, where the first successful one gets a shout out in my brother's next video. But first, let's reveal the connection between the prior pair of albums, those being Decade from Duran Duran and Queen's Greatest Hits. They were another set of greatest hits albums where the fact that they were greatest hits albums was not the connection. Duran Duran has, in addition to Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes, it's got three guys named Taylor in it. John Taylor, Andy Taylor, and Roger Taylor. None of them are related, but they all share the same last name. However, Queen only has one Taylor, and that's Roger Taylor. And both Roger Taylors from each band play the drums, so that was the connection. Eric was pointing out that Roger Taylor had he had left for a time. He's back in the band now. He rejoined in like the 2000s sometime and has basically been there since, but some of the later tracks on that Duran Duran comp did not have Roger Taylor on drums, but neither did they have another sort of official drummer in the band. So he was the only official drummer for the band, Roger Taylor. There's the connection. Nobody got it. And with that, let's move on with the show. All right, once again, we're talking about Queen's Greatest Hits. That is the third album from Queen, I believe, that we have talked about on the Collection Connection. Eric could have picked any album from Queen for his connection, just being that there were Roger Taylors in the band. For my connection, I'll say that it is album specific to Queen's Greatest Hits and ABBA's Gold album, but it is not the fact, once again, that they are greatest hits albums. Now, with both Queen's Greatest Hits and ABBA Gold being in the top 50 best-selling albums globally, I don't think that there's a lot of cause for me to necessarily go track by track through them. You probably know the songs. They're chock full of mega hits. I thought it would be more interesting to talk about the nature of greatest hits albums and along the way drop some clues as to the connection that I am looking for this album. But as Eric mentioned, the 1981 greatest hits from Queen took them through the Flash soundtrack. It was a nice way to get the song Flash if you didn't want to buy the soundtrack Flash. This is in the UK version. We got Queen on the cover there, trapped in a glass pane dimension like General Zod from Superman 2, which is also from 1981, I think. So that was apparently a trend at the time to get trapped in a pane of glass. But it is interesting that from the get-go, different markets around the world had their own track listing for it. But in 1992, they put out a new compilation called Classic Queen that focused more on the second half of their career, but crucially did borrow Bohemian Rhapsody from the first Greatest Hits album and included Tie Your Mother Down and perhaps Keep Yourself Alive. Let me see. Was Keep Yourself Alive on there? Yes. To kind of give you some of those early Queen tracks or representatives from those early Queen albums. But mostly it was focused on the works onward. And shortly thereafter, Hollywood Records, in the US this is, came out with a companion collection, once again called Greatest Hits, which went back to that 1981 track listing largely, but did not include then Bohemian Rhapsody, so that's a big kind of red flag there, and did include some songs from both Hot Space, it had Body Language on it, and I Want to Break Free from the works. But strangely, just a couple of years after that, they rejiggered everything and put out a 2-album or 2-disc compilation called just Greatest Hits 1 and 2, where Greatest Hits 1 went back to that original UK track listing, and disc 2 focused on the second half of their career, Lost Again, Keep Yourself Alive, Tie Your Mother Down, Bohemian Rhapsody, went back onto disc 1. I think it was maybe that exact track listing from the original English 1981 UK Greatest Hits album, then expanded out and given room for like Under Pressure, things that were not included on that original UK version. I would say I prefer probably the original US version, save for the fact that Don't Stop Me Now is not on it. As amazing as it is now, I would say that it's maybe in the top 3 sort of beloved Queen tracks at this point. I think Bohemian Rhapsody will forever be number 1, and Somebody to Love kind of had a big resurgence in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then sort of starting with the Shaun of the Dead movie that had a notable scene set to Don't Stop Me Now, re-raised that in the public consciousness, and it had been a minor hit in England back when it was released, but it flopped in the US. But I would argue that now, especially in hindsight, it seems foolish that they did not put Don't Stop Me Now on the original US track listing of the Greatest Hits album. To contrast that, and I suppose I should show it here. Here it is. ABBA's Greatest Hits, Gold, is the album that I'm talking about. It's kind of liberally in between both titles. When it came out in 1992, the band had already been done for 10 years at that point. We're not talking about Voyage and the stuff that happened thereafter. So now in 2024, we can say that they got back together. But in 1992, they had been broken up for a little over 10 years. And it specifically was making use of the relatively new CD format. They really pumped it full of music. I think it is 77 plus minutes long, kind of close to that 80-minute ceiling that they could hit back at that time. And the same 19 tracks have appeared on every version, as far as I can tell, of ABBA Gold from then to every subsequent reissue. Always the same 19 songs. Now, both Queen and ABBA chose to present their albums non-chronologically. With Queen, it seems like it was maybe aiming a little more towards front-loading it with the biggest hits. With the ABBA, it's a little closer to chronological, but more of a ride. It seemed like they wanted to tell stories, so it's kind of largely early to late, but the very last song on it is Waterloo, which was their Eurovision Song Contest winning song, and I believe is the oldest track actually on the compilation, so it's far from strictly chronological. I think it jumps around quite a bit, but the latter songs tend to be later in their discography. The earlier songs tend toward early in their discography, but just different approaches. Whereas Duran Duran had gone strictly chronological. I think that is kind of my preferred way to experience a greatest hits. I like it just as a fact-based thing. My favorite one is XTC's Fossil Fuel, which just takes the singles that were released as singles. It doesn't really judge whether they were big hits or small hits, because they didn't have that many big hits anyway. but just presents them chronologically. I think that is the way that I personally prefer it, but it is interesting to try to mix it into more of a ride, the way that I would make a mixtape myself. But listening to, I guess, going a little deeper on the ABBA, I listened to that, and really only Fernando is the only song that kind of really irritates me on there. There's certainly some cheese, and Thank You for the Music is especially kind of heavy in the cheese. In the presentation of it, it is even more musical theater than normal, but I think that is because it was actually part of a mini musical called The Girl with the Golden Hair, which is mentioned in the lyrics of the song. So it sort of explains, I guess if you're kind of into Broadway show tunes, there was something always very show tunes about ABBA's work. It was impeccable, immediate pop songs, dismissed back in the day as being fluff, but has turned out to be very influential and much more highly regarded in hindsight than it was at the time. People just kind of said, "Oh yeah, ABBA." That's my mother was an ABBA fan, and so I was an ABBA fan, I guess, myself. I even got a copy of Arrival for my 9th birthday, which I dug up a little photo for here. And I believe I also had The Visitors back in the day. Nowadays, the only ABBA that I have is ABBA Gold. It seems to, for the most part, suit my purposes. There's maybe one or two tracks that I would have liked to have, but I've never been too tempted to try and go back and actually buy some ABBA discography, some of their actual studio albums. But short of Fernando, and then Thank You for the Music, if you just can't take the the music theater aspect of it, all those songs are great. I love Erasure put out an EP called ABBA-esque that covers some of them: SOS, Voulez-Vous, Take a Chance on Me, and one other that I'm not going to think of right here. I've got too much info crammed in my head. That was probably the first thing that brought me back around. I talked when I was speaking about Duran Duran last week, my snobbishness. I think I turned against ABBA late in their run. Was somebody who I probably through most of the 80s would not admit that I liked, but that ABBA-esque EP from Erasure, who was one of my favorite bands at that time, really kind of brought it back, and I was happy to see this gold compilation come to life, and it's a great thing to put in every so often. Knowing Me, Knowing You, there's some lesser songs that maybe some people appreciate not so much as the unassailable big hits, like Take a Chance on Me, which is great, and Dancing Queen, and Gimme Gimme Gimme, and Waterloo. I like Super Trooper quite a bit, and some of these mid-tempo numbers that I think are the ones that I'm thinking of that people kind of dismiss, like One of Us, I think is a really good song. I Have a Dream. I don't know. I find it impossible to, at this point in my life, just dismiss ABBA. They were fantastic tunesmiths. They really put together a solid pop song that was hard to argue with, in my opinion. And it was always kind of clear what they were singing about. I think that there is some value in that. It is maybe that makes it easier to dismiss because it's not layered in artiness and vagueness, and you can hear what they're saying, and you can understand what it is that they're singing about. So that a song like The Winner Takes It All, especially if you know the backstory there, is like legitimately heartbreaking. It really gets me a little bit when I listen to it, and yet it really gives a performance there. And it blows my kids' minds when I point out that Benny and Bjorn went on to write actual Broadway or music theater with the chess show that they did with Tim Rice, which gave birth to One Night in Bangkok, the Murray Head song that both my kids love to listen to. Blows their minds a little bit. when I told him that, hey, that is Benny and Bjorn from ABBA. That is, that wrote that song. So it makes sense, that Mamma Mia became a thing. I think it was one of the first, if not the first, of these jukebox musicals. Their catalog just sort of lends itself to it. Again, the songs are all pretty clear to say what they're talking about, and so just kind of write a story around that, and you've got a thing that works like gangbusters. I think a lot of the subsequent jukebox musicals that just kind of use a band's back catalog to lay a framework around is much more tenuous because it's much less clear what the songs are about in the first place. But as I mentioned, both of these were hugely successful, top 50 albums globally of all time. The Queen Greatest Hits is the best-selling album of all time in the UK, and ABBA Gold is the best-selling album of all kinds. Is the best-selling album of all time in Switzerland, not Sweden. ABBA do have the best-selling album, the top two, in fact, best-selling albums in Swedish history, but it is ABBA the album and Arrival, I believe, are the two albums that are their bestsellers. And both New Zealand and Malta, their best-selling album of all time, is an ABBA title, a 1975 greatest hits that only shares, I believe, SOS and I'm going to forget. I know SOS was one of them, but only shares like 3 songs from ABBA Gold. So these things are massively successful. You don't need me to break down the songs necessarily individually, and they are a great shorthand if you are interested in, a solid greatest hits album that's chock full of songs that you recognize, know, enjoy, love, but aren't necessarily all that curious about going deeper into a band's catalog. Now, I have most of that Queen catalog, and I think the reason that Queen's greatest hits lingers, and I don't know if I even got around to saying this, in 1994, the greatest hits 1 and 2 went back to that original UK track listing for the 1981 greatest hits, but it was only available as a twofer, it was sold as greatest hits 1 and 2. So that left an opening for just the greatest hits album, the one that came out in 1981, to continue to exist, because it happened to come kind of right at a moment in time where a lot of their 70s fan base, especially in America, stopped being interested in Queen. And so they didn't necessarily want something that was more comprehensive, that covered their entire career. They're like, no, man, that's a perfect stopping point for me. And so even though in the US they had a few sort of different variants of greatest hits, classic Queen, this kind of thing, and you can buy greatest hits 2 on its own with that sort of, with the new branding that they came up with in the 90s. The original greatest hits still serves a place in the market. It's been a huge seller. They are, as I mentioned, both in the top 50, both over 20 million copies certified sold, and the claimed copies sold of the Queen is like 25 million and ABBA Gold is 30 million, but they have certified. The certified is much closer. It's like 20.6 for the Queen and 21.9, I think, for ABBA. But they're both in the top 50. Both huge comps, and definitely a way that you can skip out, on a band that you're mildly interested in. This ABBA Gold. So I said I did have a lot of the Queen catalog. The ABBA Gold, I feel like, probably covers what I need from ABBA. And with 1 or 2 exceptions, yeah, it has everything, and it's really good, and you probably are aware of this. So, yeah, that's what I got. It is, again, the connection is not that So I got my other Queen comps. I don't actually have the 1981. I have the classic Queen and the greatest hits that morphed into Greatest Hits Volume 2 just a couple of years after these came out. So I got them out and then didn't really show them till right then. But here it is, ABBA's Gold. And if you think you have an idea what the connection is between Queen's Greatest Hits and ABBA Gold, then put that down in the comments. And if you are right, Eric will give you a shout out in his next video. So that's all I have. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Good show, Ponsonby.